Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Welcome back again to another episode of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. This is episode 18, and we are 2 days past Christmas if you're listening on the release date. So Merry Christmas to everyone. I am here with my friend Katie Hirsch, Dr. Katie Hirsch to be exact. Katie, say hello to my people.
Hello, people.
Oh my gosh, Katie is so much fun. And I tell everyone in each episode how I met the person that I'm interviewing, because I'm proud to say everyone that I've interviewed is a personal friend. So I met Katie, I think it was in 2016 at the International Society of Sports Nutrition Conference when it was held in Phoenix. Katie, do you concur?
That seems right. Yes.
I think
it was definitely at ISSN.
It was definitely at ISSN. And I'm pretty proud of myself because up to that point, I had been going to conferences the prior few years before that. And I would just go to a session, then I'd go hide in my room. Then I'd go to a session and hide in my room. And so I arrived in Arizona early and I went out to lunch and I walked back to the venue and I went to registration and I had never met Dr. Antonio before, but I saw Dr. Antonio at registration and I saw this young, bubbly, curly-haired girl and I thought, I'm just going to go up and introduce myself. And it was, of course, Katie Hirsch, and we've been friends ever since. So there you have it. Isn't that fun? So
it is fun.
COVID sucked. Katie, COVID sucked so bad.
It did.
But there was one thing, a bright, shining moment for me in COVID, which was I got to watch you defend your thesis in 2020. Katie had to defend her thesis virtually, and so I probably never would have gone unless it was virtual. So I got to watch her grow up and become a doctor. It was so awesome. So Katie, let's get started with the really hard questions. Who is Katie Hirsch?
Oh man. Well, first I have to say both of those memories are extremely special to me. I remember meeting you at that conference, and my side of the story was I was just trying to meet people, and so excited to just talk to somebody that also wanted to talk to me as a master's student. So love that we've maintained friends. And then, yes, defending was quite the experience, but a total silver lining that I couldn't do it in person, but that everybody could come and see it, just like you, who normally wouldn't be able to see that. So that was super special. So who am I? I am an exercise physiologist and sport nutrition. I just started as an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina. I do research that focuses on exercise and nutritional strategies to support body composition changes, healthy metabolism, peak performance, whatever that looks like for you at your age, stage, career, and then overall health. So anything kind of in those realms. And then outside of that, I love all things exercise, nutrition myself, and spending time with my kitten. So that's me.
Katie, I cannot believe I forgot to say this, but in episode 17, which is releasing or has already been released, it would be December 20th, I spoke with Dr. Kelly Kennedy, also with the ISSN. And we shared a fun, Kelly and I met because of that green ISSN bag. And so yes. I always talked about the green ISSN bag, and listeners, Katie actually gave me this summer at a conference a brand new, like out of the box green ISSN bag. It was, I had a hard time not crying. I was very emotional about that. So, all right, now we know who Katie Hirsch is. What sets your soul on fire?
Oh gosh, things that set my soul on fire. I really am super passionate about my research, and I think what I love about it is what I do is very practical and applied. And so I love that I get to ask really deep scientific questions and answer them, but I can explain them to you. And they're things that the average person can understand, the average person can care about. We all need exercise nutrition in some capacity. So I love that I can get nerdy and scientific about things myself and dig into those questions, but can share it with everybody very easily. And so I just love helping people live their best lives and doing science with other people, getting to talk about it, super fun for me. So that's what gets me excited.
And since my tagline on the podcast is that I bring in the research and resources and then help the fire service with the so what, now what, you are a perfect person to talk to. Very excited. All right.
Very excited.
Last big question, Katie. How are you changing the world?
Well, that's a very large question for me. I have big, crazy ideas of how I want to do that. But honestly, I just started my career, which is extremely exciting. I've been a student and a postdoc in training up until this point. And so I'm really excited for the opportunity to grow into who I am as a researcher and what that ends up looking like for what I do and helping other people. So my hope is that I can keep growing in that. And I'm just excited to see where that takes me. I really do feel like there's big things in store. I just don't know what they are yet. So this is just one step in that journey, and we'll see where it goes.
Katie, I feel like you are one of there are scientists out there that are just the bright, shiny stars, and I feel like you're one of those. So people keep your eye on Katie Hirsch. All right, this is the part I've been really excited about, Katie. I want to get into the nerd stuff. And I'm going to have you talk about your research in general, but first, can we get kind of specific? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. One of the things that we know as firefighters from the research is that if we don't have a VO2 max of at least 42, the physiological cost, quote unquote, of firefighting is really high for us. So first off, can you explain in terms that would make sense to the typical firefighter, what does VO2 max mean in the first place? What does that even mean?
It's a good question. So VO2 max is kind of our gold standard, our best way to measure your fitness level. It involves measuring your oxygen consumption. And so the better you are at consuming and using that oxygen to support exercise, the higher your VO2 max is. And so there's a lot of physiology and metabolism and things that go into that. But in basic terms, it's just how well can you consume and use oxygen. And so it is our best way to measure your fitness level, highly associated with disease risk, physical performance, all those kinds of things.
And what kind of diseases would we be looking at, Katie?
Oh gosh, it correlates with any of them. So big ones are going to be cardiovascular, cardiometabolic diseases, diabetes, heart diseases. But even we see, like with cancer, your chances of making it through treatment well are better if we can go into those situations with a higher VO2 or a higher fitness level.
I don't think I knew that, Katie. That's amazing. So what are some of the factors that can impact our VO2 max? So let's just say I got it clinically measured. It's inadequate for structural firefighting. What are some of those things that I can focus on that will help me move that needle in the right direction?
Yes. So without getting super nerdy, practical things you can do to adjust that score are just going to be incorporating some consistent exercise. So let's say you're someone that currently isn't doing any form of regular, consistent movement. Just getting started with, let's go for regular walks. That's going to help start building a good baseline help improving all of those mechanisms that are going to help our VO2. And then our body has to be stressed. We need to do different factors to help it grow. It likes homeostasis, or staying right where it's at. So we need to push the body out of its comfort zone a little bit. And so once we've developed a good routine, now you can start adding in different things to challenge the body. So maybe that means we're going to power walk. Maybe that means we're going to add in some jogging. Maybe that means we're going to add in some cycling, maybe some weights, different things to then start challenging different aspects of the body. A big thing, building up to something a little bit higher intensity, is really going to help push those factors that drive VO2 and make us more efficient in that sense.
That is a really great answer. And so if you're listening, what I want you to take home is that you can just get started. It doesn't have to be something big and elaborate. You can just start with walking. The scientists said so. So Katie, I know that because I know you and I've gone to all of your poster presentations at every conference I've ever been to. And Katie's always so kind. She explains all of her research in words that Annette can understand. It's amazing. But one of the things that Katie studies is something called HIIT training. And this word HIIT training gets thrown around. It gets bastardized a little bit on the social media and in the news. But Katie, can you tell us what actually is HIIT training? And then how might it relate to firefighter fitness?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of HIIT training. In its basic terms, it's any form of exercise that involves short periods of really high intensity. Think on a scale of 1 to 10, about a 9 or a 10. Intensity-wise, interspersed with periods of really low intensity or complete rest. So in the lab, for my research, a lot of times that looks like working hard for 1 minute, getting your heart rate up, you're breathing heavy, you're working hard, and then 1 minute of complete rest, and we'll repeat that 10 times. And so this is a really time-efficient way to exercise. It's really, if you think about it, only 10 minutes of actual high-intensity work. If we add in a warm-up and a cool-down, we're looking at a 20-minute workout tops. And so let's see, with that, it's time efficient. We can modify it lots of different ways. And what we see in the research, it's a really, really good way to drive your VO2, improve your fitness levels in that short amount of exercise time.
So especially with a firefighter who might be on duty and there isn't a lot of time. And so one of the excuses we might tell ourselves is we don't have time to train. This is really time efficient. And so is there a particular, so we started talking about HIIT training without defining it. That's my fault. High intensity interval training. Is there a heart rate or is there a metric that we're aiming for, Katie, to get to be able to classify it as high intensity interval training?
There's a few ways we can do it. In the lab, I would measure your VO2 and we would try to get you to a level at a certain percentage of that. That's not realistic for the average person to go do. We're not measuring that just in day to day. So you can do a heart rate. The tricky part about heart rate, as we get, even when we're starting exercise, but as we get more fit, it's going to take a little while for our heart rate to catch up. And so those first few sets, you might feel like you're working really hard, but your heart rate maybe won't get up as high as you think it needs to get to. So we could calculate and say you need to reach 90% of your age predicted heart rate max. But the way I like to do it myself, that's a little bit better, in my opinion, is what I tell people on a scale of 1 to 10. Your first few hard sets should maybe feel like a 7. Now, what happens is because we have those really short periods of rest, you're not going to fully recover in between each hard set. So the first 3, maybe I'm shooting for a 7. The next 3 should maybe feel more like an 8. The next 3 should feel like a 9. And then my last one should feel like a 10, like I'm going as hard as possible and couldn't go any longer. So if I kind of follow that scale, that helps me manage and stay the right intensity through the whole thing. Now, with time, you do adapt really fast to HIIT training. You only need to do it 2-3 days a week, but the body adjusts really quick. The reason for that, we're really putting a shock on the system. We're driving adaptation, we're driving metabolism, and the body says, oh, shoot, if we're going to do that again, I got to adapt. So the body adapts really quickly. And so one thing we started doing is how do we then adjust this so it's always a true high intensity? So something you can do on your very last set, give yourself a challenge and say, okay, how long can I hold this high intensity? So whether you're power walking, jogging, swimming, biking, whatever it is, that last set, go as long as you can. If you can go for longer than about 75 seconds, it's probably in time to increase your intensity a little bit. If you don't go longer than 75 seconds, you can still only do about a minute. You're probably at a good spot. You were able to hold a high intensity through that whole protocol. So again, start at 7s, work to 8s, 9s, 10s, max it out. Throughout the whole thing, though, it should feel pretty hard. You should be breathing heavy. You shouldn't really be able to hold a conversation. You should be sweating. Heart rate should be up. All of those types of things.
I really like what you said, Katie, about your using the 1 to 10 scale and having the first sets be a 7 and then an 8 and then a 9 and then a 10. I've never actually heard it explained that way before, and that's really smart. I like it. I'm gonna integrate it. So
Good.
I just want to make sure that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but here's what I think I heard. If we are a firefighter and we find out that our VO2 max is inadequate, we can start pretty simple. If we're maybe not in great shape, we can start pretty simple with some walking. We can progress to something a little bit more challenging, whether that be jogging or doing the stairs or something like that. And then we can really drive improvements in our VO2 max when we're ready with that HIIT training. Is that a good summary?
That is correct. Absolutely. And, just to add some science with that, the amount of change in VO2 that we see with 2 and 3 days a week of HIIT training is the same change in VO2 that we see with traditional aerobic training. So what I tell people with that means you can do either modality of exercise. So if you really dislike HIIT, go do the steady training. If you really dislike steady training, go do some HIIT training. You're going to get the same end result. It's just what can we be consistent with? HIIT's also just a little more time efficient. And so a lot of us are battling time and can't always go run for 30, 45 minutes every single day. So if I can do HIIT 2 days a week and still improve my VO2, that seems like a win.
Working smarter, not necessarily harder. I love it.
Yes.
Okay, so I for sure wanted to talk to you about HIIT training. So now we can check that off the list. Let's talk about some other nerdy stuff, some of your research that you've done in the recent past that may be applicable to firefighters or just interesting and things for us to say, I might want to think about that. What do you got, Katie?
Oh gosh, things to think about. So I've done a lot of work lately on nutrition with your HIIT training. So we know HIIT's great. We get all these great adaptations, but we also know we can do things nutritionally to help drive that adaptation a little bit more even. And so some research that I published in the last couple years, we saw that with 2 days a week of HIIT training on a bike, we can drive some muscular adaptation, especially if we include some protein consumption before and after the workout. The amount of muscle, we usually think of muscle gain coming from just resistance training, and that's our best modality to gain muscle. But with HIIT training, we were able to increase muscle in the legs, which, as we know, is super important for preventing slips, trips, falls, for being able to power upstairs, carry lots of equipment, and then just overall functionality as we age. So we increased muscle mass in the legs, basically the same amount to offset age-related loss of muscle. And so if we think about, okay, again, if we're just trying to get the best bang for our buck, by doing this 2-3 days a week, adding in good protein right around the workout, if I can improve my VO2 and my leg strength, that's a huge factor for just maintaining good health, especially as we age. And that was in overweight, obese individuals who hadn't been exercising prior to that at all, but were otherwise generally healthy. And so it was really cool. We did this only for 8 weeks, so pretty quick increases over that time. So many people reported to me, even outside the study, they felt like they could get up and down stairs a whole lot better. They could now go on hikes, and they weren't the first ones to tire out. They felt like they could keep going. They felt like they had better energy to play with their children, different things like that. So it all carries over. So back to the real question, getting some protein around it can definitely help drive some of that muscular adaptation. And you can get even more bang for your buck.
And Katie, your study was in overweight and obese individuals. Do you know, would it be the same result in normal weight individuals, or research to be determined?
To be determined a little bit. I think these people were relatively healthy, so I think we would still see some increases. Obviously, the more fit you already are, probably aren't going to see the same adaptation. The other thing to think about is probably modality of the HIIT training. My guess is because on a bike, there's a lot more resistance, specifically on your legs. We were able to drive that. So something I'm curious to ask down the road is, what does that look like with other exercise modalities? What if we know there's good data on HIIT on the stairs, that can drive VO2, but does that also promote the same musculature changes that we've seen with the bike? What does that look like running? All those kinds of things.
That sounds like a great study to do in firefighters. HIIT on the stairs. And also maybe we could add in some creatine.
All good choices.
Okay. So, Katie, you did your PhD with one of the superstars of the scientific world, Dr. Abby Smith-Ryan. And if you have looked at my social media, my listeners, if you looked at my social media or read some of my emails, I talk about Abby Smith-Ryan, or we call her ASR, all the time. And so, Katie, I know for me, she is just a huge positive influence in my life, a great mentor, and I know she was for you too. But if there are any young men or women out there listening, what would you tell them about your experience getting your master's, then your PhD with Abby, going on to the postdoc? Can you kind of elaborate on that career path a little bit?
Yeah. Gosh, it's been a heck of a journey, and I think back on it all the time. My time at North Carolina was super formative. Super lucky to get to work with Abby at UNC. I honestly didn't know what I was fully getting myself into, and then quickly realized I had gotten into something really special. So my time there with Abby, I think, really opened my eyes to body composition. This is a really funny story I don't always get to share, but I remember as a little undergrad, I knew I liked exercise. I knew I liked nutrition. I wasn't quite sure what a career looked like, getting to do both of those. and I was trying to figure that out. And so I didn't know what career, but I remember out loud saying, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to do body composition.
Oopsie.
Never say never, because that's now at the core of what I do is body composition assessment. But it took going to Chapel Hill to open my eyes to how we can use body composition, how we can use exercise and nutrition to change it for the better. Anybody interested in doing a master's, I talk to students a lot now in my job about that pathway. A master's can open up a lot of doors. I think it's important to find a program that gives you the exposure to what you're interested in. And even if you're not quite sure what that is, finding a mentor doing things you are super interested in, what they're doing, their work that's what you're going to be helping with. So if you can hop in on stuff you're already excited about, that's a win for everybody. Also finding a mentor who you feel like you can work with and you have good complementary working styles and you feel like you can communicate with. That communication is so important. And then I, had the amazing opportunity to stay for my PhD and just continue with what we had been doing, growing in my research knowledge. I think at that point I knew research was a good fit for me. And so again, same things I would say for a master's, but a PhD at that point, you're kind of committing and saying, I want to do research. There's other pathways you can go with the PhD, but that's what you're going to be trained to be able to do. And so again, finding someone who can help you grow into that, give you the exposure, the opportunities. Abby pushed me to levels I didn't totally know were possible. And it grew a lot as a person, as a researcher through all of that. And I still, talk to her quite frequently. She's still a big mentor and friend in my life. And so then I went on and did a postdoc and did 2 more years of some training in a different lab, learning other techniques to measure muscle. And muscle metabolism, and got even more exposure of how do you write grants, how do you manage a lab, what does that look like in different settings. That was at a medical center versus a university setting. And then now here I am kind of merging all those experience as a professor. So
that is a wild ride, Katie. And
it has been.
I was there with you for just a little bit of it, but that's a wild ride.
You were there for most of it.
With my green bag.
You met me very early on. Yes.
Well, Katie, as you were talking about your research into body comp, it brought up one more question, which is, well, first I'll start with a statement. There's the vast majority of the fire service is currently overweight or obese. And so body composition, well, let me back up a little bit. One of the biggest predictors of injury in the fire service is overweight and obesity, as well as a previous injury. So we would be really well served to mind our body composition. And so I know at my department, we have what's called an in-body, and it's a very expensive piece of equipment that probably not every department has the luxury of having. And there are various other ways to measure body composition. So Katie, can you just riff a little bit on what does body composition even mean? How do you measure it? And then what methods are actually accurate or worth using?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to talk about after HIIT training. So body composition in really simple terms is just what is your body made up of? Most people jump straight to BMI or body fat. BMI is one way to get kind of an idea of your body composition, but maybe not our best way. So BMI says relative to your height, is your weight what we would expect? Is it higher than what we would expect or lower than what we can expect? Now, we know a lot of times BMI can be wrong, especially in individuals with high muscle mass. It starts to misclassify. But honestly, by the time we start getting into obese categories, for the average human being, it's probably fairly accurate as far as like where you fall in category wise. Now, beyond body fat with body composition, there are other components of our bodies. So that's muscle mass, like I mentioned. It's also body water is a really large component of our body, and that's important. And so are our bones. And so in the lab, I specialize in a really fancy measure where I account for all those pieces of your body composition because that varies by your age, by your sex, by your race. All those different things can influence bone, muscle, water, body fat, all those pieces. Now, that's really only something we can do in the lab. It's really expensive. It requires a lot of equipment. So something like an InBody is actually a really great choice. While I was at North Carolina, we did a lot of validation on the InBody device compared to our best way of measuring. And it really does a very good job. Now, there's the potential for high variability. So it might tell you you have, let's say, 25% body fat. That could be plus or minus 3 to 5%. Especially if you're maybe not well hydrated. But if you do the measure hydrated, rested, first thing in the morning before you've eaten, exercised, really done anything else, it is going to give you a fairly accurate measure. And most importantly, it's going to be really good for tracking. It is pretty reliable. And so even if it's not exactly spot on, if you're trying to reduce body fat or change your body composition, it is going to be good for tracking. So just doing it first thing in the morning before any other influencers, it's going to do a good job. The reason I love body comp and the InBody is good for this too is I think it's important to not just focus on the body fat aspect, but also the muscle. I know as a former college runner, I was very wrapped up in what was my weight, what was my body fat, and that's all I really thought about. And nobody ever explained to me. I knew muscle was important, but it just nobody told me like, do I have good muscle mass? Is it higher? Is it lower? And unfortunately, we don't have awesome ways to classify musculature. However, when you're tracking your body comp, you can kind of tease that out. And so you can see, okay, is my weight changing? If it's not, that might be a good time to look at the components of your body comp. Have I gained muscle and lost some body fat, and that's why my weight hasn't changed? Or am I losing musculature and gaining body fat? Where are those two pieces going? A big thing that happens with weight loss, people just focus on the body fat. And so they do things like heavy calorie restriction and cut out a whole bunch of carbohydrates. And unfortunately, protein gets cut a lot. If all we focus on is restricting and eating less, we do lose body fat, but we also lose muscle. And muscle's not what we want to lose. We want to stay strong. Muscle drives our metabolism. It's what drives our caloric expenditure. It's what burns body fat. You want to keep that muscle. And so that's where exercise becomes so important during that time. That's where getting good protein becomes so important during that time. So as you're trying to reduce those numbers, you want to make sure that musculature number stays consistent or increases. Most likely it's going to stay the same, maybe decrease a little bit, but we want to make sure we're not losing large amounts of muscle mass. I've seen during my time in the lab, you see people that are like, oh, I've lost a lot of weight. And we get them on the scale, and it's true, they have, but it's come from fat and muscle. And so then when we see their percent body fat, it didn't change because they've lost both. And unfortunately, you can be a quote unquote normal weight individual and still have a high percent body fat, which still puts you at risk for disease. So we need to change that ratio between the two. And that's where I think that body comp tracking helps you see those pieces and just saying, am I moving those numbers in the direction I actually think I am?
I have two thoughts, Katie. The first one is I just gave a talk this morning and I have a slide in that talk that says build muscle like your life depends on it, because it does.
Yeah.
It's a little dramatic, but it's also true. I feel validated now. Thank you, Katie.
Yes.
And then my second piece of it is, it's very difficult. Skin fold calipers are difficult for even a skilled operator to get a decent number. So to give the typical firefighter a pair of skin fold calipers and say, go measure your colleague's body fat, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. No.
One of the things that I've incorporated as part of my yearly fitness testing, just as a measure to track, is waist to hip ratio. It's simple. It's easy to find the landmarks. And I always track that, but can you give us any insight into why we even started tracking waist to hip ratio? What does it mean?
Yeah, so waist to hip ratio starts to get at body fat distribution. And so not only is body fat in and of itself kind of a risk factor, but maybe even more importantly is where are you storing that body fat? And so higher amounts of body fat within your abdominal region, called android patterning, or think apple-shaped, puts you at higher risk for metabolic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, all those things we want to avoid. Why? Because that fat's not being stored below the skin, like we normally think of body fat. It's being stored within the abdominal cavity, right up next to all of our vital organs. And so it starts to create a lot of pressure and inflammation right there next to your organs. And so that form of body fat, much more associated with disease risk than if we're storing it more around our hip region. Some of that's influenced by hormones. So men tend to store more body fat within the stomach region. That's where testosterone tends to direct body fat. Women tend to store more fat around the hip region. That's where estrogen directs body fat. With women, though, it gets tricky as we age and go through menopause and estrogen decreases. Now we take on a more android or stomach patterning of body fat. So that's where disease risk in women starts to increase as we get older. That's part of it. So that waist to hip ratio can help you start to see, where am I storing that body fat? What might my risk be?
And you can get one of the great tape measures that make it really easy to get a great accurate measurement on Amazon for like $4.99. So
yes,
you can track that metric no matter what budget you have. Outstanding. Well, Katie, I have reached the end of my questions for you today, but was there anything that I should have asked you that I missed the boat and I should have brought up in conversation? Anything that you can think of?
Well, one thing I was just thinking I should have said at some point, with talk of body comp and exercise, I think a lot of people can get wrapped up in body comp numbers. So those are good goals, but recognize that takes time to change. It's not going to happen even in a month. You're going to see slow, steady progress, and that's going to stay off longer. But by doing consistent exercise, whether that's your daily walking, incorporating HIIT training, eating healthy, having good, healthy muscle through exercise and diet helps offset excess body fat. And so if we can keep our muscles healthy while we're trying to adjust that body fat, that helps with disease risk substantially. So our muscle quality is just as important as muscle quantity. So that would be my take-home point.
Ooh, that was very profound. Muscle quality is just as important as muscle quantity. I like it. Okay. Well, Katie, if any of the listeners want to catch up with you on social media, or if you want to provide an email, are you open to communication from my listeners?
Absolutely. Send them my way.
All right. Social media, Instagram, is that the one you like to use?
You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, or you can always shoot me an email.
All right. I'm going to put all Katie's contact information in the show notes. And Katie, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a month. And with that, this is AZ, and I'm with Katie, and we are officially out.
Bye.